A very happy Lord's Day to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's daily Bible reading for May the 21st. Today we are reading together in Deuteronomy chapter 15, where we are looking at the subject matter of canceling debts, releasing slaves, and also giving the firstborn of every flock to Yahweh, consecrating that to Yahweh. We'll be reading that here in just a second once I get that up on the screen for us. Hope you've had a great weekend. Hope that this Lord's Day for you has started off well. I'm excited to read these texts together along with you here today. Let me just get my Bible organized here. There we go. All right, let's read together here in Deuteronomy chapter 15. And actually, before we read, let's set the stage a little bit because there's a pretty decent segue, I think, from chapter 14 here into chapter 15. At the end of chapter 14, talks about how you are helping, showing generosity to the Levites, but not just the Levites, but to the resident alien, to the fatherless, to the widow. Every third year, you would do that. And there was this practice of bringing things, a tenth of what you have into the city gates, and allowing those who are needy to have it. Well, here's another way in which the people of God were to show care and concern for those who were less fortunate, those who had debts, or those who were slaves because of being in debt. We're going to see that here in chapter 15. So moving from chapter 14 into chapter 15, at the end of chapter 14, it says, at the end of every 3 years, bring a tenth of all your produce for that year and store it within your city gates. Let the Levite, who has no portion or inheritance among you, the resident alien, the fatherless, and the widow within your city gates, they may come, eat, and be satisfied. And Yahweh your God will bless you in all the work of your hands that you do. So continuing on to refresh the people's minds concerning various aspects of the law, and what they needed to do in order to show covenant loyalty to Yahweh, in order to be pleasing to him, so as to be blessed. We pick up in verse 1 of chapter 15. We saw in 14:28, at the end of every 3 years. Well, now at the end of every 7 years, you must cancel all debts. This is how you cancel debts. Every creditor is to cancel what he has lent his neighbor. He is not to collect anything from his neighbor or brother, because Yahweh's release of debts has been proclaimed. You may collect something from a foreigner, but you must forgive whatever your brother owes you. There will be no poor among you, however, because Yahweh is certain to bless you in the land Yahweh your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance, if only you obey Yahweh your God and are careful to follow every one of these commands I'm giving you today. When Yahweh your God blesses you as he has promised you, you will lend to many nations, but not borrow. You will rule many nations, but they will not rule you. If there is a poor person among you, one of your brothers within any of your city gates in the land Yahweh your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward your brother. Instead, you are to open your hand to him and freely loan him enough for whatever need he has. Verse 9, be careful, verse number 9, that there isn't this wicked thought in your heart. Here's the proposed wicked thought. The 7th year, the year of canceling debts, is near, and you are stingy toward your poor brother and give him nothing. He will cry out to Yahweh against you, and you will be guilty. Give to him, and don't have a stingy heart when you give. And because of this, Yahweh your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you do, for there will never cease to be poor people in the land. That is why I'm commanding you, open your heart willingly to your poor and needy brother in your lands. Verse number 12, if your fellow Hebrew, a man or woman, is sold to you and serves you 6 years, you must set him free in the 7th year. When you set him free, do not send him away empty-handed, but give generously to him from your flock, your threshing floor, and your wine press. You are to give him whatever Yahweh your God has blessed you with. And remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Yahweh your God redeemed you. That is why I am giving you this command today. But if your slave says to you, I don't want to leave you, because he loves you and your family and is well off with you, take an awl and pierce through his ear into the door, and he will become your slave for life. Also treat your female slave the same way. Do not regard it as a hardship when you set him free, because he worked for you 6 years, worth twice the wages of a hired worker. Then Yahweh your God will bless you in everything you do. Consecrate to Yahweh your God every firstborn male produced by your herd and flock. You are not to put the firstborn of your oxen to work, or shear the firstborn of your flock. Each year you and your family are to eat it before Yahweh your God in the place Yahweh chooses. But if there is a defect in any animal, or if there's a defect in the animal, if it is lame or blind or has a serious defect, you may not sacrifice it to Yahweh your God. Eat it within your city gates. Both the unclean person and the clean may eat it, as though it were a gazelle or deer, but you must not eat its blood. Pour it out on the ground like water. And that is the reading of Deuteronomy chapter 15. Again, main subject matter here within this chapter, what takes up the most of the chapter, is forgiveness. The forgiveness of debts, and then in a sense, forgiveness of slave. Maybe the better word here is release. It is the release of debts. It is the release of slaves. This is to take place every 7th year. There's to be this release of debts. You must cancel debts. Now there is some discussion about what debt this was. Was that the debt that occurred for that year, or was that the entirety of the debt? Excuse me. There's a little ambiguity that some see in this text, that it doesn't exactly state explicitly which debt it is that they're talking about, again, whether in totality or whether that occurred for that year. But whatever it was, they were to not collect anything from their neighbor. Again, this is Yahweh's release of debts. It has been proclaimed. Now you can take from a foreigner, again, showing a distinction between those who belong to Israel, those who are Jews, and those who are Gentiles. Specifically, this is in reference to releasing your brother, your fellow Jew, of any debt that he might have against you. Now, you might have caught this, and I caught this as I read it. Verses 4 and 11 seem on the surface, I think, like a contradiction. Verse 4 says, there will be no poor among you. There will be no poor among you. But then verse 11 says, for there will never cease to be poor people in the land. So which is it? Which of these is true? I think the best way to understand this, to reconcile these two texts, is to recognize that verse 4, there will be no poor person among you. That's the ideal. That is the idea that there should be, maybe the way to understand this best is there should be no poor among you. However, why? Well, because Yahweh is certain to bless you in the land Yahweh your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance. Now, there's the condition, if only you obey Yahweh your God and are careful to follow every one of the commands I'm giving you. So if you do this, number one, if you're faithful to these commands, then God's going to bless you. And then in turn, you will be able to bless other people. You'll be able to help other people. You'll be able to give freely and liberally to other people so that there is no poor in the land. That's the ideal. But unfortunately, that's just not going to be the reality because of sin and poor decision making and just bad luck and unfortunate circumstances sometimes. So yeah, there were always going to be the poor people, but ideally, this would all work out as if there were none. But in the reality that there are those who are poor and that are in need of help, there are some instructions given here. I'm going to just read off the negative instructions, the things that they are not to do. They are not to be hard-hearted. They are not to be tight-fisted. They are not to have wicked thoughts in their heart. They are not to be stingy toward the poor and give them nothing. They're not to do this. It'd be very easy for them to have this type of attitude, especially if the timing was a certain way. Let's say that it was in year 4 or 5, say year 6 of this 7-year cycle, and someone comes to them and is in need and asks for lending of resources in order for them to survive. If it's year 6, they know, man, in just a year, this is going to be released. This person is not going to pay me back. He's just going to skirt on me. Then that type of mindset could lead them to say, I just don't really want to give as I should give. Moses says here, Yahweh says through Moses, that is wickedness in your heart. That is a wicked thought in your heart. That is you being stingy. That is you being tight-fisted. That is you being hard-hearted. That's not okay. You are to loan freely to him. You are to freely give, freely loan to your brother. Open your hand willingly to your poor and needy brother in the land. That's the expectation. Just as Yahweh gives freely and liberally to you, so you are also to give freely and liberally to others. Now, beginning in verse number 12, we see 12 through 18, we see the release of slaves. Again, they serve you 6 years. In the 7th year, you're to set them free, but don't send them away empty-handed. Again, as you let them go free, and this is really one of the issues of releasing slaves. Some people have questions about releasing slaves in the Bible. Why do we not see any just blanket condemnation of releasing slaves, let them go free? Well, one of the reasons for this is that if you just release the slaves, release all slaves at one time, especially like during the New Testament times under the Roman Empire, the population of slaves was huge. So if you just release everybody all at once, then you're going to have a lot of needy people on the streets not able to provide for themselves. Well, within the law here, within Moses, what was given through Moses by Yahweh, there was a way to prevent that. And it was by whenever you release a slave in the seventh year, you don't send them away empty handed. You don't send them out there and say, hey, good luck to you. Hope you make it. No, you are to not send them away empty handed. You are to give generously to him. Give it generously to him from your flock, from your threshing floor, your wine press. You are to give generously to him. Give him whatever Yahweh has blessed you with. So you're going to set them up for success as you give them this new start outside of your authority. And again, part of this is it actually ties in very well with the Exodus story, because if you remember in the Exodus story, whenever they left Egypt, they did not leave empty-handed. No, the Jews were given lots of resources, tremendous wealth at the hands of the Egyptians. They sent them away with arms full of goods. Therefore, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to do the same for those who are leaving your house. But you know what? Say that you treated them very well, and they love you, and they respect you, and they appreciate the situation that they're in. They want to do that. If the slave initiates this, I think that's a big key here to understand. If the slave initiates the desire to stay, then you are to do the all ceremony, put the ear up against the doorpost, drive it all through it, and they will be your slave forever. You'll be your slave forever. Do not, and then going back to the release of slaves, something else that is important to note here from verse 18, do not regard the release of slaves, do not regard it a hardship. Do not regard it a hardship. They've done well for you. Be thankful for their service. Be thankful that things are amended between you two, and go on with yourself. Everything is fine. Do this, and Yahweh will bless you in everything that you do. Now, the last section here in chapter 15 concerns the consecration of firstborn animals to Yahweh. Again, every firstborn male produced by your herd and flock, you are to give that to Yahweh each year. You and your family, verse number 20, are to eat it before Yahweh your God in the place Yahweh chooses. So whenever you go offer your sacrifices, go offer the firstborn, you do that there. But here's some stipulations. If there is a defect, lameness, blindness, any serious defect, you don't offer that to Yahweh. This gets into what we see in Malachi, that they were rebuked for giving this type of sacrifice to God, very strongly rebuked. And you don't do that. You do not offer this defective thing to God. You would not offer it to your city leader. Therefore, you certainly should not offer it to God. However, if it's just lame, blind, the reality is you can still eat these things. You can still eat a lame or blind lamb just like you would anything else. So they could, whether it be a normal clean person, or whether it be even an unclean person, you can eat this as if it were a wild animal like a gazelle or a deer. But again, something that we've seen a number of times throughout this text already. Let's see back here in chapter 12 and verse 16. I meant to mark this down earlier. Chapter 12 and verse 16. And also chapter 12 and verse 23 and 24. So 12, 16, and then 23 and 24. In those instances, you are to make sure to not eat the blood. You're to pour it out. And the same thing is true here within this section as well. If you want to eat the less than perfect animal, that's fine. No big deal. Just make sure you keep the dietary law of not eating meat, and everything should be good to go. Again, what we see in chapter 15 is just a reminder. There's a lot more detail given about these two subjects. Let me see if I can find it really fast so I can locate it really quickly. I forgot to write it down earlier where these two were originally found. Let's see, Exodus 22, Exodus 25, I think it is actually. Let me double check my math there. Exodus 25, nope, not Exodus 25. Look, Leviticus 25. There we go. Leviticus 25. Let me double check Leviticus. I could read right, would be okay. Yeah, Leviticus 25 is going to be your reference for more details concerning the release of debts and slaves. So if you want to go back and review that a little bit, make your note there for Leviticus chapter 25. If you have any other questions or comments about this text today, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. And I'd love to have a discussion with you, find some more answers for you if you have any questions as best I can. I really do appreciate you taking the time to read along with me as we start off this Lord's Day together in God's Word. Here in a little while, we'll be gathering for our Bible studies and worship assemblies. Bible studies at 10 o'clock, worship assembly at 11. And we'll be continuing our study through the Gospel of Mark, looking at the Messiah on a mission. We're going to look at the remaining parables and teachings that are found by Jesus in Mark chapter 4. We're going to pick up in Mark chapter 4 and verse 21 and go through the end of the chapter looking at not putting a lamp, the famous well-known kids song, "This Little Light of Mine." We'll be looking at that teaching in verses 21 through 25. We'll be looking at the parable of the growing seed in 26 through 29. And then finally, the parable of the mustard seed in 30 through 32. We'll talk more about that here in just a little while as we continue, as I mentioned, our study through the Gospel of Mark. Hope to see you there. Hope to see you tomorrow as we continue our read through Deuteronomy. We'll be looking at Deuteronomy chapter 16 tomorrow on Monday, May the 22nd. Hope you can tune in then. Take care. God bless.